My name is Cadet Vorik Dull, and I want it on the record, before this story goes any further, that none of what happened was entirely my fault. Well, most of it was not my fault. Fine. Some of it was not my fault. The point is, I was young. I was freshly promoted to third-tier cadet of the Galactic Sovereignty Fleet, and I had just been assigned to Station Helix 9, which sits in orbit above a small, unremarkable, completely forgettable blue planet called Earth. The assignment was considered a punishment post by every senior officer in the fleet. Nobody wanted to babysit humans. They were, according to every briefing I had ever received, loud, irrational, emotionally unstable, and bizarrely fond of fermented beverages. I, Vorik Dull, had just been given the honor of spending 6 rotations watching over them. Outstanding. Truly, my career was off to a magnificent start. I arrived at Station Helix 9 on a standard transport vessel, along with 14 other cadets from my training cohort. My cohort leader was a broad-shouldered Telvari named Drusk, who had the personality of a wet stone and the conversational range of a malfunctioning navigation unit. He gave us the standard briefing during docking approach. Earth is a Class 7 observation zone, Drusk announced, standing at the front of the transport bay with his forearms folded in official disapproval. Humans are a pre-integration species. They are not to be directly engaged without clearance from a supervising officer. You will observe, log, and report. Nothing more. One of the cadets, a wiry Celian named Pix, raised her hand. What if they try to engage us? Drusk stared at her. They cannot see us. We operate above their detection threshold. Pix nodded slowly. And if somehow they could? They cannot. Right. But hypothetically, Drusk unfolded one of his forearms and pointed at Pix with a single long finger. Cadet Pix, I have been doing this assignment for 11 cycles. No human has ever detected a sovereignty observation post. No human has ever acknowledged our presence. No human has ever looked directly at one of our cloaked relay drones and said anything intelligible. He paused. Do you understand? Completely, said Pix. Good. That was day 1. Day 3 was when I met the human. Her name, I would later learn, was Lena Marsh. It happened because of a malfunction. The cloaking relay on Drone Unit 7 had been giving inconsistent readings for 2 standard days, and since I was the lowest-ranking cadet on the station, guess who got assigned to do a manual diagnostic? Correct. Vorik Dull, sent in a single-occupant survey pod to hover approximately 40 meters above a residential district in a mid-sized human settlement. Cloaked. Completely invisible. Absolutely no risk of detection. I positioned the pod over the designated coordinates, ran the diagnostic program and waited. Below me was a quiet street. Small cube-shaped structures arranged in neat rows. Green patches of organic ground covering. A few humans moving along narrow paved paths, doing whatever humans did at mid-cycle. One of them was walking an animal on a leash. 4 legs, wagging rear appendage. Enormous enthusiasm for everything. Earth database identified it as a dog. I logged it as item 4 in my field notes. Then I noticed the second human. She was sitting on the elevated platform attached to the front of one of the cube structures, what the database called a porch. She appeared to be in her late developmental cycle, somewhere between 25 and 35 solar years by Earth measurement. She had dark reddish hair that she had tied into what I believe the database called a messy bun, which appeared to involve jamming a thin stick through a looped bundle of hair. She was wearing clothing that had clearly not been selected for any kind of official function. She was holding a flat rectangular device in one hand and a cylindrical container in the other, and she was looking directly at my pod. Now I want to be absolutely clear. The pod was cloaked. She could not see it. Drusk had said so himself, with authority, on day 1. No human had ever detected a cloaked relay drone. No human had ever. She tilted her head. She narrowed her eyes. She set down her cylindrical container, and she said, out loud, with complete and total calm, "Okay, whatever you are, I can see you." I froze. Every single system in my pod froze with me. The diagnostic program, which had been running smoothly, issued a small beeping sound that I can only describe as confused. She could not see me. She could not. The cloak was functioning at 97% efficiency. The human visual spectrum does not extend into the ranges our cloaking system operates within. This was established science. Tested and proven. She pointed at the pod. At my exact location. You're about 40 meters up, roughly 12 degrees off my chimney line. You're kind of shimmering, like heat haze but wrong. I stared at her through the observation panel. She stared back at where I was. Then she smiled. It was, in hindsight, a very alarming smile. I did not report the incident immediately. I know. That was my first mistake. But I want you to understand my reasoning, which was completely logical and not at all motivated by embarrassment. If I reported that a human had spotted me, Drusk would file an incident report. That incident report would go to Fleet Command. Fleet Command would launch an investigation. The investigation would determine that I had been spotted because I had positioned the pod 3 meters lower than the regulation hover distance, which I had done because the diagnostic was slightly out of range at the regulation height. So, yes, I had technically bent a regulation by 3 meters, and now a human had spotted me because of it. I decided to handle the situation myself. I increased the cloak to 100% efficiency and moved the pod up to regulation height. Problem solved. She had probably seen a heat shimmer. I logged it as an atmospheric anomaly, completed my diagnostic, and returned to Helix 9. I thought about Lena Marsh for the rest of the day. On day 5 I went back. I filed the trip under follow-up diagnostic maintenance, which was not entirely fabricated because Drone 7 was still running at 94% and technically needed another check. I hovered at regulation height. I positioned the pod perfectly. She was on the porch again. This time she had a notebook, a physical one, made of pressed organic material. She was writing in it with a thin ink dispensing instrument. She did not look up immediately. I watched her for approximately 4 minutes. Then she looked up, directly at me. Again. You came back, she said, to the empty air 43 meters above her. I made a sound that was not a word. It was more of a vocalization of distress that happened to escape through my breathing passages. She heard nothing, obviously. The pod was soundproofed. But she smiled again, that same smile, and reached down beside her chair, and she picked up the cat. Now, the Earth database had entries on cats. I had read them. I considered myself informed. Domestic feline, small mammal, kept as companion animals, known for independent behavior and occasional affectionate behavior toward bonded humans. The database had absolutely failed to prepare me for this specific cat. It was grey, entirely grey, from nose to tail. Its fur appeared to be arranged in a manner that suggested it had opinions about how it looked, and those opinions were that appearances did not concern it at all. It was large, for a cat, with a face that held an expression I could only describe as ancient and deeply unimpressed. She held it up toward my general location, like she was presenting it to me. "This is Gordo," she said. "He's the reason I can see you." I stared at the cat. The cat stared at exactly where I was sitting inside the cloaked pod. The cat's eyes were a pale yellow, almost luminescent. They did not blink. I, Cadet Vorik Dal, top 12% of my training cohort, decorated for academic excellence in xenobiology and navigation theory, felt a chill work its way up my secondary spine. The cat was looking at me. Not at the pod, not at the general area, at me. I went back to the station. I did not eat my evening nutrition ration. I sat in my bunk quarters and pulled up every entry the database had on Earth cats. 47 minutes later, I had learned 3 things. First, humans had domesticated cats approximately 10,000 years ago, though several anthropological researchers had suggested, somewhat humorously, that the cats had domesticated the humans. Second, cats had visual ranges that extended into spectrums beyond standard human perception. Third, and this one was in a footnote, a single footnote, buried in a xenobiology supplementary appendix that had been filed by a researcher named Quell Invari approximately 30 cycles ago, never peer-reviewed, never formally accepted, and largely ignored by the academic community. Third, there were 3 recorded cases of domesticated Earth cats reacting to cloaked sovereignty survey equipment. In each case, the researcher had logged the reaction as coincidence. In each case, the cat had stared directly at the cloaked object. I sat with that for a long time. Then I went to find Pix. Pix was in the Common Observation Lounge, cataloguing plant life data from the Southern Continental Surveys. She looked up when I came in with the expression of someone who had learned to expect bad news from people who had my specific face. "Vorik," she said, "you look terrible." "A human saw me," I said. Pix set down her data pad. Silence. "On day 3, I added. More silence. And I went back on day 5, and she did it again. Pix opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Drusk is going to remove your secondary antenna with his bare hands." "She has a cat," I said. The cat sees through the cloak. The cat. The cat, Pix. She stared at me. Then she reached over and picked up her datapad, slowly, like someone handling fragile cargo. Tell me everything. So I did. Every detail. The porch, the cylindrical container, the way Lena Marsh had tilted her head and pointed at my exact coordinates, the grey cat named Gordo with the pale yellow eyes that did not blink, the footnote in the appendix. By the time I finished, Pix was not laughing. She had the look she got when something genuinely interesting had crossed her path, which was rare, because Pix was the kind of person who found most things at least mildly interesting and reserved that particular expression for things that were extraordinary. The cat is seeing past the cloak, she said. Apparently, and the human is trusting the cat enough to look where it looks. Yes, and then Pix made a gesture with her hand. Talks to the empty air like it is completely normal, she said, and I quote, "Whatever you are, I can see you." I paused, and then on day 5 she introduced me to the cat. Pix was quiet for a moment. "I like her," she said. "You have never met her." "I like the concept of her," Pix corrected. "She found an alien surveillance pod using a cat. That is, objectively, extraordinary." I had to concede that point. It was objectively extraordinary. "What do we do?" I said. Pix tapped her datapad against her knee. "You need to make contact. That is a Class 3 protocol violation." Drusk also said no human would ever spot us. I had nothing to say to that. Pix leaned forward. "Vorik, think about what this means. Her cat is seeing past military-grade cloaking technology. That is not a coincidence. That is not a domestic animal being quirky. Something about that animal's biology is functionally bypassing our best concealment systems." She paused. "And she is calm about it. She is not afraid. She is not reporting it to her authorities. She is sitting on her porch with her cat, drinking from her cylinder, waiting to see if you come back." I thought about that. "She is waiting," I said quietly. "She knows you will come back," Pix said. "The question is whether you will actually say hello." I looked out the observation lounge window at the blue planet below, at the cloud formations drifting across the continent where a woman named Lena Marsh was probably sitting on her porch right now, with a grey cat named Gordo in her lap, looking up at the sky with those calm, knowing eyes. "What do I even say?" I asked. Pix smiled. "Start with hello, see where it goes." That night I filed a formal request for an extended diagnostic review of Drone Unit 7. Drusk approved it without reading it. And on day 6 I went back to the blue planet, to the quiet street, to the small cube-shaped structure with the elevated platform, carrying a translation module in my pocket that I had borrowed without asking from the station's xenolinguistics cabinet. I descended to 40 meters, regulation height, fully cloaked, completely invisible. She was there. Gordo was there. Gordo looked up the instant I arrived, those pale yellow eyes, no blinking. Lena Marsh looked up 2 seconds later, following the cat's gaze with the easy familiarity of someone who had been doing this for a while. She smiled. "Took you longer this time," she said to the empty air. "I was starting to think you weren't coming back." I turned on the external speaker. I pressed the translation module against it, and in the most undignified voice I have ever used in my life, a voice that cracked slightly in the middle because I was in fact terrified, I said, "Hello." Lena Marsh blinked. Gordo did not blink. Gordo had never blinked. And then Lena Marsh laughed. Not a scared laugh. Not a hysterical laugh. Just a genuine, warm, surprised laugh, like someone who had been waiting for something for a very long time and had finally gotten it. "Okay," she said, "finally." She reached down and scratched Gordo behind his ear. Gordo purred. And somewhere in Fleet Command's databanks, a protocol violation was quietly, unknowingly, beginning to be written. Let me tell you something about the Galactic Sovereignty Fleet's official First Contact Protocol Manual. It is 842 pages long. I know this because I had read it, twice, during training. It covers everything: environmental hazard assessment, psychological stability evaluation of the contacted species, linguistic barrier management, cultural contamination risk mitigation, chapters on body language, chapters on gift exchange customs, an entire 40-page section dedicated solely to the proper way to announce your presence without triggering a panic response. 842 pages. And not a single one of them had prepared me for Lena Marsh leaning back in her porch chair, crossing her ankles on the railing, and saying, with the energy of someone discussing the weather, "So how long have you guys been watching us?" I stared at her through the observation panel. Gordo stared at me. I said, through the external speaker and translation module, in a voice that I was working very hard to keep steady. That is a complicated question. Long time then, she said. Yes. She nodded like I had confirmed something she already knew. Gordo figured it out about 3 years ago. Started staring at the sky at the same spots, same times of day. I thought he was watching birds at first. She glanced down at the cat, who was sitting on her lap with the dignified stillness of a creature who knew he was being talked about and considered it his right. Then I started paying attention to where exactly he was looking, and I noticed the shimmer. The shimmer, I repeated. Like I said the first time, heat haze but wrong. Your cloak works fine on human eyes, but it leaves a kind of distortion, a wrongness in the light. Most people would never notice, but I notice things. She paused, and Gordo notices everything. I had approximately 60 follow-up questions, and the professional training to ask none of them without authorization. What I said instead was, "You never told anyone." She raised an eyebrow. Who was I going to tell? The government? So they could come set up a perimeter and confiscate my cat? She shook her head. No. I figured if you wanted to say something you would. Eventually. She looked up toward where I was hovering. And here you are. Here I was, 43 meters above a residential street in a human settlement, conducting an unauthorized first contact interaction with a woman and her cat, while my supervising officer sat on Station Helix 9 reviewing plant data and believing I was running a routine drone diagnostic. Fantastic, truly, everything was completely under control. Her full name was Lena Marsh. She was 31 years old by Earth's solar measurement. She worked from home, doing something involving large quantities of written data that she described as technical editing, which I gathered meant she fixed other people's mistakes for a living. She lived alone, except for Gordo. How old is he? I asked, mostly because Gordo had not stopped staring at my exact location for the past 20 minutes, and I felt that acknowledging him was both polite and potentially wise. Nobody knows, Lena said. I found him on my doorstep 6 years ago. Adult cat. No chip, no collar. Vet said he was probably around 4 or 5 at the time. She scratched behind his ear. Gordo allowed this with the grace of a king accepting tribute. So somewhere around 10 or 11 now. But honestly, he seems ageless, like he was born knowing things. He sees past our cloaking system, I said. I know. That should not be possible. I know that too. She smiled. And yet, I looked at Gordo. Gordo looked at me. I had the distinct and uncomfortable sensation that Gordo had been looking at me since long before I had arrived in this sector of the galaxy, and was merely tolerating my presence while he waited for me to catch up to something he already understood. Can I ask you something? Lena said. I cannot promise I can answer. Fair enough. She adjusted her position in the chair. Why did you come back? After day 3. You could have just reassigned the drone, moved the observation point, avoided me entirely. I was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was that I had not been able to stop thinking about the way she had pointed at my exact location without hesitation, without fear, without anything except calm certainty. The honest answer was that in 2 years of training and 6 days of field assignment, I had never encountered anything that had genuinely surprised me, and she had surprised me twice in 3 days. The honest answer was that I was 22 years old, far from home, assigned to a planet everyone else in my fleet considered beneath their attention, and something about a human woman who saw things other people missed made me feel like maybe I had been assigned here for a reason. What I said was, scientific curiosity about the cat. Lena laughed again. That warm, surprised laugh. Sure, she said. Scientific curiosity. Absolutely. She knew I was lying. I could tell. She let me lie, which was somehow both gracious and deeply embarrassing. I went back every day for the next 8 days. Each visit was filed as drone diagnostic maintenance. Drone 7 was, technically, still running at 94% efficiency, and I was technically monitoring it from a nearby position, so this was not entirely fraudulent documentation, just creatively framed. Pix knew what I was doing. She did not report me. She did, however, start collecting data. Tell her about the footnote, Pix said, on the 4th evening, when I returned to the station and sat down in the common lounge to go through my field notes. The Quell Invari appendix. Tell her about the 3 cases. I cannot share classified xenobiology data with an uncontacted species. Vorik. She has already uncontacted herself. She is sitting on a porch having daily conversations with you. The ship has sailed. The ship has left the harbor, exited the atmosphere, and is currently somewhere past the third orbital ring. I could not argue with this. She deserves to know that her cat is not unique, Pix said more quietly, that there have been others, that something about Earth Cat specifically is doing this. She is a scientist by temperament, even if not by title. She will want the data. I thought about that. Also, Pix added, I have been running a spectral analysis on the footage you brought back from the first 3 visits. Gordo's eye structure has 2 additional receptor layers that are not in the standard Earth feline database. Whoever compiled that database was working from a very small sample size. She turned her datapad around so I could see it. Look at these readings. I looked, even through the second-hand footage. Gordo's pale yellow eyes in the spectral analysis showed receptor activity across 4 distinct bands. 2 of them were standard domestic feline ranges. 1 was slightly beyond typical mammalian visual range, and one was operating in the exact frequency range that our cloaking system used. I stared at the data for a long time. He was born seeing it, I said. Or evolved to, Pix said, which raises a much larger question about whether Earth cats have been watching us for a lot longer than we have been watching them. The lounge was very quiet. That is, I said carefully, an extremely unsettling hypothesis. Yes, Pix agreed pleasantly, it really is. I told Lena about the Quellinvari footnote on day 9. She did not say anything for almost a full minute after I finished. She sat very still, her cylindrical container held in both hands, looking at the middle distance with the focused expression of someone sorting through a large number of thoughts very quickly. Gordo, during this entire period, continued to watch me. He had moved from her lap to the porch railing, where he was sitting with his tail wrapped around his feet like a piece of sculpture that had decided to be alive. 3 other cases, she said finally, in the records. In the accessible records, I corrected. The appendix was not formally reviewed. There may be more. There are more, she said with a certainty that gave me pause. Every cat person I know has a story. A cat that stared at something invisible. A cat that reacted to empty corners. Everyone thinks it is just cats being weird. She looked at Gordo. But it is not just cats being weird, is it? Based on our spectral analysis of Gordo's eye structure, no. He has receptor layers that should not exist in a standard domestic feline. He is seeing something genuinely outside the normal range. He is seeing you. He is seeing all of us. Anytime any observation equipment enters his visual range. Lena was quiet again. Then she said, so your entire observation program has been watched this whole time by every cat within visual range of your equipment. Apparently. And not one of those cats told their humans. Cats are famously poor at voluntary information sharing, I said. Lena made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something more complicated. Except Gordo told me. He did not tell you. He showed you, repeatedly, until you paid attention. She looked at Gordo for a long moment. Gordo looked back at her with those pale yellow eyes that saw through military-grade cloaking technology and somehow still managed to convey mild, affectionate exasperation. Yeah, she said softly. That sounds like him. On day 11, Drusk called me into his office. I stood in front of his desk and waited, with the calm exterior of someone who had done nothing wrong and the internal experience of someone standing on a structural platform that had just developed a visible crack. Drusk looked at my filed maintenance reports. He looked at me. He looked at the reports again. Drone 7, he said. Sir, running at 94% efficiency. Sir, for 11 days. It is a persistent calibration issue, sir. Complex to isolate. Drusk's forearms shifted. 2 of them folded. The other 2 remained on his desk in a posture that, in Telvari body language, means I know exactly what you are doing and I am deciding whether to be annoyed or impressed. Cadet Vorik, he said. In 11 years of running observation assignments, I have never seen a single drone require 11 consecutive daily diagnostic visits. I said nothing. I have also, Drusk continued, with the careful tone of someone constructing a very precise sentence, reviewed the external speaker activation logs for your survey pod. The floor did not open and swallow me. I checked. It did not. The speaker was activated 6 times, Drusk said, during maintenance visits, in proximity to a residential structure in Settlement Grid 7. He looked at me. Cadet Vorik, the speaker, was activated 6 times. Sir, I said, was it a malfunction? I thought about Lena Marsh on her porch. I thought about Gordo on the railing. I thought about 842 pages of first contact protocol that I had thrown respectfully into the void the moment she had said, Whatever you are, I can see you. No, sir, I said. It was not a malfunction. Drusk stared at me. The silence was tremendous. Then, slowly, he turned his datapad around. On the screen was a communication flagged from Fleet Command's Xenobiology Division. Subject line, urgent review request, and below that a forwarded message from a researcher at the division, attached to a spectral analysis report. My spectral analysis report, the one I had shared with Pix, which Pix had apparently forwarded through official channels without telling me. Fleet Command, Drusk said, is very interested in the cat. I exhaled. They are also, he continued, technically obligated to flag your unauthorized contact violation, which carries a formal reprimand and possible reassignment. He paused. However, the Xenobiology Division has submitted a concurrent request to establish a supervised contact liaison program with the human in question, citing the cat's biological data as a matter of significant scientific priority. Another pause. Which means your violation and their research request are, currently, sitting in the same review file. Together. Together, I repeated. Together. Drusk looked at me with the expression of a man who had seen a great many things in 11 years and was adding this one to the list without visible surprise. You will receive a formal reprimand in your service record. You will also be assigned as the primary liaison officer for the new contact file, since you have already established a working relationship. He leaned back, and Cadet Vorik, Sir, next time a human spots your pod and speaks to the empty air. He unfolded two of his arms. Reported. Yes, sir. Immediately. Yes, sir. Not on day 11. Understood, sir. I went back to the porch on day 12, not as a cadet running a drone diagnostic, officially this time, filed correctly, supervised contact liaison visit, logged, stamped, and authorized by a supervising officer who had written in the remarks field, with the energy of someone who had stopped expecting his assignment to be boring, authorized, proceed with standard caution, and for the record note the cat. Lena was there, Gordo was there. Gordo was on the railing, watching me arrive with those pale yellow eyes, and I was almost certain that in the slight shift of his tail position, he was expressing satisfaction. I brought the pod down to 30 meters, not regulation hover height, 30 meters. Because at 30 meters the external speaker did not need to be as loud. You are official now, Lena said, before I even turned the speaker on. How did you know? You came earlier than usual, and your shimmer is different, more settled. She tilted her head. Also, Gordo looks pleased. He only looks like that when something goes the way he wanted. I looked at Gordo. Gordo looked at me. Pix had sent me a preliminary draft of the xenobiology report that morning. Working title, Spectral Perception Anomalies in Domesticated Earth Felidae, Potential Implications for Sovereignty, Cloaking Technology and Observed Long-Term Interspecies Awareness. 34 pages, already flagged for priority review. By tomorrow it would be on the desk of every senior researcher in the Fleet Science Division, because of a grey cat on a porch railing who had looked at a cloaked survey pod 3 years ago and decided that his human should probably know about it. Fleet Command wants to establish a formal liaison program, I told Lena. With you? She raised both eyebrows. With me specifically, or with humans generally? You specifically. For now. I paused. You saw us, nobody else has officially. Gordo saw you first. Yes. Fleet Command is also very interested in Gordo. She looked at her cat. Her cat looked back at her with an expression that managed to communicate both "I told you so" and finally "you people are paying attention" simultaneously. He is not going anywhere, she said firmly. Whatever interest they have, he stays here, with me. That is already in the agreement. Good. She picked up her cylindrical container and held it up slightly, in what I had learned was a human gesture of acknowledgement between individuals. Then I guess we are doing this officially. Apparently. You know, she said, looking up at the sky past my pod, at the blue dome of the atmosphere, and the space beyond it where a station full of aliens was going to have a very interesting next few months. I always figured if we ever made contact with something out there, it would be loud, a big broadcast, lights, a statement. She smiled that smile again, the one that was warm and knowing and a little sharp at the edges. Not a cadet sneaking back to talk to a woman on her porch because her cat blew his cover. I was running a diagnostic, I said. You were running a diagnostic, she agreed, in the tone of someone who believed none of it. Gordo made a sound. Short, low, and entirely self-satisfied. Fleet Command had 842 pages of first contact protocol, They had committees, task forces, decades of theoretical framework. And first contact, real first contact, the kind that sticks, the kind that gets into the history files and stays there, had started with a grey cat on a porch railing who had decided that the shimmering thing in the sky was worth paying attention to, and a woman who had trusted her cat. As first contacts go, I have been